Remember, there's some pretty important information here in the disclaimer. You might want to give the video a quick pause and read it.
Hello my friends, this is Wake Angel 2001, and don't worry, the old school theme song and thumbnail is not part of an April Fool's prank. Nope, this is just because I felt it was kind of fitting. Besides, this is the last part of Dylan D's commission and he really liked the old school stuff. That's right, this is going to be the last figure for Dylan D. It is Mighty the Armadillo. Now, don't worry, I'm not going to be putting the new classic Mighty figure's head onto a Sonic body. Besides that, those neck pegs aren't compatible, and the head will be way too big. Actually, I've seen people make a pretty good modern Mighty by taking the 2.5-inch figure's head and sticking it onto a modern Sonic's body, because apparently, like, if you look at the size of their faces, they're the same size. So, like, yeah, the classic characters, like the 2.5-inch version of a classic character's head is actually the same size as a 4-inch modern character head. Isn't that kind of funny? But no, this is really going old school. Dylan went through the effort of finding an intact Jazzwares Sonic figure to send to me. The only thing wrong with this figure is that the left hand is glued on. Everything else about him was fine. And this is an incredibly old school Sonic figure. When I dismantled it, I found out that it still had the long, skinny pegs for the shoulders and hips. You know, the ones that Jazzwares stopped using because they were too easy for children to break. I can't believe that one of those was still intact after all this time, and that all the joints still worked good. But I digress. I'm actually talking about the customization, not how old school this figure actually is. So the first thing I did was I carved the head as small and round as I could, so that I could sculpt the armadillo shell on top of it. This is actually one of the hardest parts because, you know, like, I can't simply cut the pieces off. I gotta actually get in there with the Dremel and get into a whole bunch of sanding. And since I live in an apartment, I had to do this while crouched over a garbage can to make sure I caught all the plastic flakes, because if it gets into any of the fabric of my furniture or my floor, it will be very difficult to clean up. I really need to get a house with a garage. Alright, and then I drilled a couple of holes in the sides of his head and stuck these toothpicks in so they could work as the anchoring points for Mighty's armadillo ears. Yeah, I was using... The reason why I had the other Mighty figure out was just because I was using him as a reference for, you know, how big parts should be, where they should go, yada yada yada. And then the sculpting comes in. Once those ears harden, so I don't have to worry about accidentally mushing them out of shape, on comes the shell and the thingies on top of his shoes. You know, I cut the buckles off and put on the bigger cushion stripe that Mighty has on his shoes. So with the shell all sculpted, we have a Sonic head converted into a Mighty head. It's not 100% perfect because, again, Sonic's head was never really meant to do this, and Mighty's shell just kind of isn't 100% compatible with the proportions, because, you know, Mighty was never meant to be a modern character. He was always a classic character. Unless they can actually go through the effort to make a modern Mighty figure, but then you would be acknowledging the Archie comic because that's the only time that Mighty was ever in modern aesthetic. But again, yep, that is just something that I do. So here is Mighty the Armadillo, suffering from a little bit of Jazzwares lean. Yeah, like, the lean isn't my fault. I measured it. The figure's left leg is legitimately about 1 millimeter longer than the right leg. This was Jazzwares' mistake, not mine. Again, this is one of the first Sonic figures, the one with the longer mushroom pegs, meaning that the quality control hadn't been completely hammered out yet. So, all of the joints are technically intact, but you aren't really going to get much movement out of the head because of the way the shell kind of impacts the shoulders. But, unlike the modern figures that Jakks Pacific makes, this figure has a waist joint, so you can kind of use that waist joint to get a little bit more. It's just that you're kind of cutting the stomach patch when you do that, but hey, it's not a perfect world. But hey, with that, we have another modern Mighty figure made using old school techniques on an old school figure, and I don't know, all this old school, it just kind of feels cool that just by pure coincidence, I happened to finish the figure on April Fool's Day. Like, anyone who saw that thumbnail and was expecting me to make some hilarious jokes, like, nah, this is just a straight up custom. Well, I guess you did get all the way here to the end of the video. Boner. Okay, yeah. Thank you all for watching. This is Wake Angel 2001 signing off.
Oh, hey everybody, it's me, Sonic the Hedgehog. Just here to remind you that if you haven't already, make sure to hit that like button. And for even more amazing customs, don't forget to subscribe to Wake Angel 2001. Because between you and me, they're way past cool.